Hey, everyone. If you're hearing this, you're still alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It helps keep these stories coming. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now take a breath and let's begin. The smell of the subway is what I remember first. Not the zombie rot. That came later. But the old, familiar scent of wet concrete, ozone, and humanity that had baked into the tiles over a century. It was the smell of my commute. For 10 years, I descended into the 14th Street Union Square station, taking the 4/5/6 downtown to Wall Street, and climbed back into the light a different man. Leo Weiss, financial analyst, spreadsheet samurai. That man died 30 days ago. The thing crawling through the tunnel now was an animal, bleeding from a gash on its temple, clutching a fire axe, and so thirsty I was considering sipping from a dank puddle. The outbreak hadn't been a wave. It had been a switch. One day, news reports of feral flu. The next, my Bloomberg terminal flashed market halted, as a woman in the cubicle next to me stood up, tilted her head, and vomited black bile onto her keyboard before lunging at the intern. I ran. We all ran. For 30 days, I'd survived above ground in a nightmare gallery of fire, screams, and those things, shamblers I called them, for their dragging gait. I'd holed up my apartment until the water stopped, then a bodega until the canned beans ran out, then just ran. The city was a tomb. The streets were theirs. My last desperate idea was the underbelly. The subway. The tunnels had to be clearer. Maybe I could follow them out of the city. I was wrong. The stations were charnel houses. The tunnels were worse. Dark, echoing with distant moans and the skittering of giant rats. I'd been down here for 2 days, navigating by the light of a dying phone, heading north, utterly lost. My last protein bar was gone. My water bottle held a warm, metallic swallow. The gash on my head, from a fall over a corpse on the tracks, throbbed with a heat that promised infection. That's when I found the collapse. The tunnel ahead was completely blocked by a mountain of shattered tile, steel beams, and concrete where the ceiling had given way. A dead end. My last hope extinguished. I slumped against the grimy wall, the coolness of the tile a small mercy on my feverish skin. I was going to die here in the dark and become one of the things shuffling through it. As I slid down the wall, my shoulder hit a section of tile that gave way with a hollow clunk, not the solid thud of the others. I jerked back, raising my axe. Nothing emerged. I shone my phone's light. It was a tile, but behind it wasn't rubble. It was a metal surface, painted a dull gray, and in its center was a featureless black plate. A keypad? No, a retinal scanner. My mind, fogged by exhaustion and fear, sputtered. This wasn't MTA infrastructure. This was something else. Something hidden behind the subway's skin. I pried at the edges of the tile with my axe head. More tiles around it were false, a clever facade. Behind them was a sealed metal door, about 7 feet tall, flush with the tunnel wall. There was no handle, just a scanner, and below it, almost invisible, a small, hinged metal flap. I lifted it. Behind it was a numeric keypad, and a slot that looked like it took a security card, a state or federal bunker. It had to be. Post 9/11. They'd built hidden refuges all over the city, myths among urban explorers. I'd found one. Hope, vicious and painful, shot through me. Then despair. It was locked, impossibly locked. I was a financial analyst with a fire axe, not a spy. I punched the metal door in frustration. It didn't even dent. I slumped against it, tears of rage and helplessness mixing with the grime on my face. The moan echoed down the tunnel behind me. Close. Then another. They'd caught my scent or the sound. I fumbled for my phone, switched off the light, plunging myself into utter blackness. I could hear them now, the slow, scraping shuffle of feet on gravel. Multiple pairs. Getting closer. I pressed myself against the cold metal door, making myself small. Think, Leo. Think. They built these places for people. For emergencies. There had to be a manual override. A physical key for when the power fails. My hand scrabbled over the door's surface in the dark, feeling for seams, holes, anything. My fingers found it near the base behind a small, recessed grate, a sturdy mechanical lock, a heavy-duty deadbolt. It needed a key, a big physical key. The shamblers were close now. I could smell them, earth death and that coppery tang. I could hear their wet breathing. Key. Where would you hide a key? Not on a person. In a secure nearby location. A lockbox. I felt the wall around the door, up and down. Nothing. The floor? I dropped to my knees, patting the filthy ground. My hand hit a loose piece of track ballast. I dug frantically. Nothing but rocks and dirt. The first shambler rounded a slight bend in the tunnel, silhouetted against a faint, green emergency light from a distant station. It saw me. It let out a guttural moan and quickened its pace. Panic. Pure, mindless panic. I stood, raised my axe. I'd take one with me. Maybe two. Then my foot kicked something metallic that skidded away from the door with a clink. Not a rock. A different sound. I dropped again, sweeping my hands. My fingers closed around a small, cold, rectangular metal box covered in grit. A magnetic key safe. The kind realtors use. It was stuck to the side of the steel door frame, hidden in the shadow. The shambler was 10 feet away. I could see the ruin of its face. I fumbled with the box. It had a combination lock. For digits, what's the universal code? My brain screamed. 0000, 1234. I spun the wheels to 1-2-3-4. Yanked. It didn't open. The thing was 5 feet away, arms rising. Think of a state code. My mind, trained for patterns, latched onto the only state number I knew by heart. The number of the original colonies. 13. 1-3-1-3, 1-7-7-6. I spun the dials to 1-7-7-6. Pulled. The box sprang open. Inside, on a felt lining, was a single large brass key. The shambler lunged. I threw myself sideways, its grasping hands brushing my jacket. I scrambled to the door, shoved the key into the deadbolt. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk that echoed like salvation. I grabbed the door's edge, there was a seam now, and pulled. It was immensely heavy, but it swung inward on silent hydraulics. A wave of cool, dry, sterile air washed over me, smelling of ozone and metal. I stumbled inside, turned, and saw the shambler reaching the threshold. I put my shoulder into the door and heaved. It began to swing shut. A decayed arm thrust through the closing gap. I slammed the door on it. Bone crunched. The arm went limp. I pushed again, and the door sealed with a final, deep thud. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. And darkness. Then, with a soft hum, lights flickered on. I was in a small, white antechamber. A decontamination spray nozzle hung from the ceiling. Ahead was another heavy door with a large wheel lock. A green light above it glowed. I had found it. I was in. But as I stood there, panting, the key clutched in my bleeding hand, a terrible new thought surfaced. What if I wasn't alone in here? And what if, by sealing that door, I hadn't just locked the monsters out? I had locked myself in. The second door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The wheel turned smoothly, and the thick steel hatch swung inward. The light that spilled out was a bright, clinical white. I stepped through, axe raised, into the heart of the silent citadel. It was a control room, straight out of a Cold War movie, but newer. A semicircle of monitors, now dark, dominated one wall. Banks of switches and indicator lights glowed softly under brushed aluminum panels. A large digital calendar on the wall was frozen on October 12th, the day the world ended. The air was cool, around 68 degrees, and dry. The hum was omnipresent. The sound of machinery keeping a secret alive. Hello. My voice was a raspy croak, absorbed by the acoustic tiles. No answer. The silence was heavier than the darkness in the tunnels. I explored with the caution of a mouse in a cathedral. The bunker was laid out along a central corridor. The control room was the brain. Branching off were other chambers, each sealed with a lighter, airtight door. The first was the barracks. 6 bunk beds, neatly made with olive green blankets, lockers, and a small bathroom with a chemical toilet, and a showerhead connected to a pressurized tank. The water ran cold, then, after sputter, warm. Actual hot water. I almost wept. Next was a commissary. A small kitchenette with an induction stove, a microwave, and a large refrigerator. I yanked it open. It was full. Sealed plastic trays labeled beef stew, vegetable pasta, apple cobbler. MREs, but fancy ones. Dozens of them. On shelves were cans of vegetables, fruits, sacks of rice, beans, powdered milk. Enough for one person for years. Then the armory. It was a locked cage, but the door was ajar. Inside were racks for weapons, all empty save for a single, lonely box of 9mm ammunition. No gun. Someone had taken them. The thought was a cold wire down my spine. Someone had been here, geared up and left, or was still here. The final room was a heart, life support, rack upon rack of whirring electronics, air scrubbers, a massive water purification and recycling system fed by a dedicated aquifer well, according to a schematic on the wall. The power source was a deeper geothermal tap, coupled with a bank of lithium-ion batteries the size of cars. A digital readout glowed. PWR reserve, 98%. EST runtime, 18 months. 18 months of power, of air, of water. I returned to the control room and found the master panel. There were cameras. I switched them on. One by one, monitors flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images. Camera 1, the antechamber, empty. Camera 2, the tunnel outside the door. 3 shamblers now stood there, pathetically pawing at the metal. Camera 3, a view of the subway platform above the collapse, a hellscape of shadows and movement. Camera 4, a rooftop view, a panorama of the dead city under a gray sky. My breath hitched. It was real. It was all still out there. I was safe. Impossibly, miraculously safe. I had food, water, power, and a toilet. I had won the apocalyptic lottery. The first thing I did was strip. I left my filthy, reeking clothes in a pile by the entrance and stood under the shower in the barracks for 20 minutes, scrubbing until my skin was raw. The water was hot and endless. I found generic soap and a towel. The simple act of being clean was a spiritual experience. I dressed in 2 big military-issue sweats from a locker. I heated a beef stew MRE in the microwave. The beep it made was the most civilized sound I'd heard in a month. I ate at the control room console, watching the shamblers on camera 2. The food was salty and rich. I devoured it, then immediately felt sick. My shrunken stomach rebelled. That first night, I slept in a top bunk. The mattress was firm. The blanket was crisp. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum. The silence was different from the tunnel silence. This was engineered silence. It was the sound of being alone in a way I'd never been before. There were no sirens, no screams, no moans. Just the hum of the machine that was keeping me alive. I missed the moans. They meant there was a world, however terrible, outside. Days began to pass. I fell into a routine. Morning was when I woke. I'd exercise in the corridor, push-ups, sit-ups, anything to fight the muscle atrophy of confinement. I'd check the systems. All green. I'd eat. I'd read. The bunker had a small library of technical manuals, survival guides, and a shelf of paperbacks, thrillers, mostly. I read them all, then read them again. I started talking to the cameras. Camera 2, you're looking ugly today. New friend, I see. Welcome to the party. It was madness, but it was a structured madness. The central struggle wasn't physical. It was psychological. The citadel was perfect. It demanded nothing and gave everything. And it was erasing me. My memories of sunlight felt like dreams. My old life, the stress, the coffee, the noise, seemed like a fairy tale. Here, there was no weather, no time, no decay, just stasis. I began to experiment. I found the bunker's comms equipment. There was a powerful radio transmitter. I spent days trying to raise someone, anyone, static, Eternal static on every band. The silence on the airwaves was worse than the silence in the bunker. It meant I might truly be the last one. On day 10 in the bunker, day 40 since the fall, I noticed something on camera 3, the platform view, a blinking light, not a fire, a rhythmic, deliberate blink, a flashlight. Someone was signaling. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't alone. There was another living person up there, in the Hell's Cape. They were above the collapse, on the other side of the rubble mountain from my hidden door. They had no way of knowing I was here. Their signal wasn't for me. It was a general distress call, or a lure. The silent citadel had just gotten a window to the world, and the world was blinking back. The peace was over. The question now was, did I answer? The blinking light became my obsession. It appeared every night, between 2200 and 0200 hours, according to the bunker's digital clock. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Over and over, from the same spot on the ruined platform. A plea or a trap, cast into the darkness of the subway. 3 nights. I just watched. My existence, which had flattened into routine, was now bent toward that one grainy screen. I imagined who it might be. A survivor like me, hiding in a service closet, a group holding a position, the person who'd emptied the armory, luring others in. The logic of the old world said, answer, help. The logic of the last 40 days screamed, trap, silence. On the 4th night, the pattern changed. After the SOS sequence, the light flashed 5 times quickly, then a pause, then 5 again. It was deliberate, a new signal. My analyst brain, long dormant, kicked in. It was code, not Morse. Something simpler. A number? 5 flashes, a number 5? Or was it a count? I grabbed a notebook and a pen. I started transcribing. That night sequence was SOS, then 5 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, pause, 1 flash. 5, 3, 1. The next night, SOS, then 2 flashes, pause for flashes, pause, 6 flashes. 2, 4, 6. It was coordinates. It had to be. But for what? A location on platform? A map grid? On the 3rd night of the new code, it clicked. The platform had signs for exits. Exit 1 to 14th Street, exit 2 to Irving Place, etc. The first number was the exit. The second number, maybe the number of steps? Or a time. The sequence that night was 429. Exit 4. Then 2, then 9. 9 p.m.? 9 a.m.? Or the number 29. I had to get a closer look. I couldn't go up. But I had cameras. Camera 3 was fixed wide angle. I needed to see detail. I spent a day in the life support room, tracing wiring conduits. The cameras were fed by fiber optic lines that ran through the ceiling. There had to be a maintenance access. I found it in the commissary ceiling, a removable panel. Behind it was a crawl space, a tight maze of cables, ducts, and chill pipes. I wriggled in with a flashlight, following the bundle labeled SEC Cam 03. It ran about 30 feet before terminating at a small junction box. From there, a single cable snaked up through a conduit that presumably led to the camera itself. This was my only connection to the signal. I couldn't redirect the camera, but maybe I could tap the signal, see if there was audio. The junction box had spare ports. Back in the control room, I rummaged through drawers of spare parts. I found a small battery-powered monitor and a bundle of connectors. It was a long shot. I worked for hours in the dusty crawl space, my hands shaking. I was an engineer. I was a guy who used to build pivot tables. But desperation is a great teacher. I managed to patch the spare monitor into the feed. I powered it on. A duplicate, slightly fuzzier image of camera 3's view appeared. But now I had control. I could zoom digitally. The image pixelated badly, but I could zoom in on the source of the light. That night, when the flashes came, I was ready. I zoomed. The image was a mess of grain, but I could make out a shape behind the light, a human silhouette hunched in the broken doorway of a employees-only stairwell. One person, small, possibly a woman or a youth. They were holding the light close to their chest, pointing it up the tunnel, away from the platform's main area where shamblers sometimes wandered. They were hiding. They were scared. And they were signaling for help, not setting a trap. The next sequence flashed. 417. Exit 4. Then 1. Then 7. I needed to confirm my theory. I had to signal back. But how? I couldn't flash the bunker lights. They were internal. The camera had no output. The radio. The powerful transmitter. I could broadcast. But broadcasting into a dead city was like shouting in a silent forest. Everyone and everything would hear. But what if I broadcast on a frequency only they could receive? They had a flashlight, not a radio. Unless I zoomed in again on the figure the next night. This time I saw it, a small, boxy shape on a strap across their chest. A handheld emergency radio. The cheap, crank-powered kind sold for hurricanes. Hope, sharp and terrifying, lanced through me. They could hear me. The next day, I studied the radio equipment. I could broadcast on the standard emergency weather band. Every one of those little radios could receive it, but so could anyone else with a radio. And my transmission would originate from here. I give away the bunker's approximate location. It was a risk, a monumental risk. But the sight of that lone, hunched figure flashing numbers into the void had cracked the perfect shell of my citadel. Their silence was calling to mine. That night, during their signaling window, I made my choice. I sat at the comms panel, my hand on the microphone switch. I watched the monitor. The flashes came. 285. I took a deep breath, keyed the mic, and broadcast on the weather band. My voice, and used as speaking above a whisper, sounded alien even to me, to the person signaling from the 14th Street platform. I see your flashes. I read your numbers. Do you copy? Over. I released the mic static. On the screen, the flashing light stopped dead. My heart sank. Had I scared them? Was it not a radio? Then the light flashed again, frantically not in code. Just rapid, repeated flashes. On, off, on, off. A response, an acknowledgement. I keyed the mic again, my voice steadier. I can't come to you, but I can talk. What do the numbers mean? Over. A long pause. Then 3 deliberate flashes. Yes. Then the SOS pattern resumed, followed by the numbers. 417. I understood. They were giving me their location. Exit 4. Stairwell 1. And the 7? Maybe a floor? Or a room number. I understand. I broadcast. You are at exit 4. Stairwell 1. What is the 7? Over. 1 flash. No. Then a new pattern. A long series of short and long flashes I couldn't decipher. They were trying to talk. It was too slow. We needed a better way. Do you have paper? A marker? I asked. A single, confident flash. Yes. Tomorrow night at 2200. Hold up messages to the camera. I will do the same from here. We'll figure this out. A final, clear flash. Yes. I sat back, my shirt stuck to my back with cold sweat. I had done it. I had made contact. I was no longer alone in my silent citadel. There was a ghost in the wires, a voice in the static. I had a purpose now, a puzzle to solve, a person to reach. But as I looked at the frozen green 98% on the power reserve readout, a new fear took root. I had just opened a door, and doors, in my experience, had a way of letting more than just light in. Her name was Cass. She spelled it out on a grimy piece of cardboard held up to a broken security camera dome on the platform, which she'd somehow figured out was my eye. CSS. Over the next week, using our laborious system of handwritten signs and my radio voice, her story emerged in fragments. She was a transit worker, a signals apprentice. She'd been in a maintenance closet deep in the lower mezzanine when the world fell. Her closet became her bunker, small, stuffy, but safe, with a sink and a vending machine she'd eventually cracked. She'd been there for 42 days. The SOS was her last, desperate gamble. The numbers were her location. Exit 4, Stairwell 1, 7th day of trying. She'd been signaling for a week to an empty world. I told her I was in a secure location nearby. I didn't say bunker. I didn't say where. Trust was a slow-growing plant in the dark, but we cultivated it. We established a schedule. 2200 to 2300 was talk time. She'd hold up her signs. I'd respond by radio. We talked about nothing. Old movies, bad pizza, the surreal horror of the before times. It was the most human connection I'd felt since the fall, and it was conducted like a spy swap. But her situation was dire. Her water came from a leaking pipe. Her food was gone. The vending machine had yielded its last bag of peanuts days ago. She had a small knife and her flashlight. That was it. The shamblers, she wrote, were few on the platform but constant in the tunnels. She was trapped, slowly dehydrating, in a concrete tomb. I had a fortress of plenty. She was starving in the dark, 20 vertical feet, and a mountain of rubble away. The ethical calculus was simple. I had to help her. But the practical calculus was a nightmare. To reach her, I had to leave the bunker. I had to go back into the tunnels, navigate past the shamblers at my door, climb the collapse, if it was even climbable, cross the deadly platform, and find her stairwell. Then I had to get her back. It was a suicide run. But not helping was a slower, more cruel suicide for my soul, if not my body. I spent 3 days preparing. I studied the camera feeds obsessively, mapping shambler patrol patterns on the platform. There seemed to be a lull around 0400, the dead hour before the false dawn. I packed a backpack. Bottles of water for my endless supply, high-calorie MRE packets, a basic first aid kit from the bunker supplies, a spare flashlight. I took the fire axe. It was my lucky charm. The hardest part was the door. Opening it meant breaking the seal. It meant letting the world in. I dressed in the military fatigues from the locker, layered for protection. I stood in the antechamber, my hand on the heavy wheel lock, and practiced my breathing. This was a protocol. Out fast, close faster. The shamblers outside would be active on the designated night. I told Cass the plan via a hastily drawn sign I held up to my camera's lens. A crude stick figure going through a door. She held up a sign with a giant, and then danger. I just nodded at the camera, hoping she could see the determination I didn't feel. At 0350, I stood in the antechamber. The outer door monitor showed 2 shamblers loitering. I waited. At 0358, one shuffled away. At 0400 on the dot, I turned the wheel, unsealed the door, and pulled. The tunnel air hit me, damp, foul, alive with decay. The remaining shambler, a thing in the tatters of a business suit, turned and moaned. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out and swung the axe in a hard, horizontal arc. It took the thing in the temple. It dropped. The noise echoed. So much for stealth. I pulled the bunker door shut behind me, hearing the locks engage. I was out, exposed. The tunnel stretched in both directions, pools of darkness between the distant emergency lights. I moved toward the collapse, my heart a drum in my throat. The rubble mountain was treacherous. Chunks of concrete shifted underfoot. Rebar claws reached out to snag my clothes. I climbed on hands and knees, dislodging small avalanches of dirt and tile. Every sound seemed magnified. I reached the top and peered over. The 14th Street platform was a vision of hell. Trash, abandoned luggage, and dark stains littered the tiles. 5, maybe 6 shamblers to like sentinels at various points. At the far north end, near Exit 4, I saw the broken camera dome and the door to Stairwell 1. I had to cross 200 feet of open space. I lowered myself down the far side of the collapse, trying to be a shadow. I crouched behind a toppled newsstand. My plan was to move from cover to cover. The newsstand, a row of shattered vending machines, a cluster of support columns. I took a breath and ran for the vending machines. My boots crunched on glass. A shambler near the south turnstiles turned its head. I froze, pressed against the cool metal. It moaned, took a step my way, then lost interest, turning back. I moved again, reaching the columns. I was halfway. Exit 4 was ahead. I could see the stairwell door, slightly ajar. Cass's hideout. Then I saw it. Between me and the door, lying across the path, was a body, not a shambler, a fresh kill, recently alive. Blood was still dark and wet on the tiles, and it was surrounded by 3 feeding shamblers, crouched over like wolves. My path was blocked. I couldn't go around without being seen. I had to wait for them to finish, or draw them away. As I watched in horror, the body moved. A hand twitched. The person wasn't dead. They were turning. One of the feeding shamblers lifted its head, as if sensing the change, and bit down again, ending the struggle. Nausea rose in my throat. I had to move. Now, I reached into my pack, pulled out a plastic water bottle. I hurled it as far as I could down the platform toward the south end. It clattered loudly against the tiles. All 3 shamblers, and 2 others nearby, snapped their heads toward the sound. With low moans, they shambled off to investigate. The path was clear. I didn't think. I sprinted. My boots pounded the tiles. I reached the stairwell door, yanked it open, and slipped inside, pulling it shut behind me. Darkness. The smell of mildew and urine. I flicked on my flashlight. A small, gaunt face peered from around a corner, halfway down the stairs. Wide, terrified eyes above a bandana. Cass. She held a wrench like a weapon. Leo. Her voice was a whisper, cracked from disuse. Yeah, it's me. We have to go. Now. I shoved the backpack at her. Water. Food. Now. She fumbled, drinking greedily from a bottle, tearing into a protein bar. As she did, I assessed the stairs. They led up to the street, but the door at the top was chained shut from the inside. Her closet was a landing halfway down, where the stairs turned. The things outside, they'll come back, she whispered, her voice stronger already. I know. We go back the way I came. Over the collapse. To my place. She just nodded, trust given completely in her desperation. We crept back to the platform door. I opened a crack. The shamblers were milling where I'd thrown the bottle, confused. The path back to the collapse was clear. Ready? Run fast, don't look back. She nodded, her jaw set. We burst out of the stairwell and ran. This time we made noise. They saw us instantly. A chorus of moans erupted. They gave chase. We were faster. We reached the base of the collapse and scrambled up. Cass was agile, a city rat used to tight spaces. We reached the top as the first shambler started clawing its way up after us. I turned and kicked a loose piece of concrete down at it. It struck its shoulder, sending it tumbling back. We slid down the other side, toward the bunker door. The 2 shamblers who were usually there were gone, drawn by the earlier commotion. The coast was clear. I fumbled for the key in my pocket, my hand shaking. I unlocked the deadbolt, swung the door open. Get in. Cass dove inside. I followed, turned, and pulled the door shut just as the first pursuing shambler reached the bottom of the rubble pile. The lock clunked home. Silence. Cool, dry air. Bright light. Cass stood in the middle of the antechamber, dripping filth onto the clean floor, staring at the gleaming interior of the control room, beyond the second door. Her face was a mass of utter, incomprehensible shock. I had completed the protocol. I had retrieved the asset. But as I looked at her, this stranger from the dying world, now standing in the heart of my sterile sanctuary, I realized the mission was just beginning. I hadn't just brought back a person. I had brought back chaos, need, and the terrifying, beautiful weight of another human life. Cass's integration into the silent citadel was a silent earthquake. For the first 2 days, she was a ghost. She ate voraciously but quietly, bathed for an hour, and slept for 16. She moved through the bunker like a visitor in a museum, touching nothing, her eyes wide. The hum of the machinery seemed to unsettle her more than the moans of the shamblers had. I gave her space. I showed her the systems, the food, the water. I gave her a bottom bunk. We spoke in polite, hushed tones. Thank you for the food. The shower is there. It was the awkwardness of 2 survivors who'd only communicated via flashcards, now sharing a living space the size of a studio apartment. The tension wasn't animosity. It was structural. The bunker was built for a crew, maybe 6 to 8 people, for a short-term crisis. It was not built for two people to cohabitate indefinitely. Every sound she made, the cough, the rustle of her blanket, the way she chewed, was amplified by the silence and my own neurotic solitude. My perfectly ordered world had a new, unpredictable variable. The first crack appeared over power. I was obsessively conservative. Lights off in unused rooms. 1 5-minute shower every other day. Cass, coming from a world of constant scarcity, found the abundance bewildering. On her third day, she took a 20-minute shower. The water recycler's pump kicked on with a louder than usual groan, and I saw the water reserve tick down by 2%. It was negligible, but to me, it was a hemorrhage. The water is recycled, but the system uses power to clean it. I said, trying to sound educational, not accusatory. She looked chastised, her cheeks red. Sorry, I forgot what it was like. The phrase, what it was like, hung between us. She meant the before times. A luxury we can no longer afford, even here. The second crack was the routine. My schedule was my sanity. Calisthenics at 0800. System check at 0900. Lunch at 1200. She had no schedule. She slept irregular hours, paced the corridor at night, and spent hours just staring at the live feed from the platform camera, watching the shamblers. Her vigilance was a mirror to my own, but it felt like an intrusion. This had been my screen, my window. The real pressure drop came a week later. It was a sound, a low, intermittent thump from deep within the life support room. A sound that hadn't been there before. We both heard it. A shared look of alarm broke through our polite distance. We investigated together. The sound was coming from the geothermal heat exchange unit, a massive, sealed unit that tapped into the Earth's heat to regulate temperature and assist in power generation. A red warning light, one I'd never seen illuminated, was blinking on its panel. Pressure fluctuation. What does that mean? Cass asked, her voice tight. I don't know. The manual. I scrambled for the hefty binder labeled LS Unit Geotherm 7. I found the troubleshooting guide. Pressure fluctuation could mean a leak in the closed-loop system, a pump failure, or a fault in the deep earth probe. The recommended action: initiate diagnostic cycle. May require external maintenance port access. External, outside the bunker. The perfect, closed system was failing, and the fix might be beyond the steel door. For the next 48 hours, the thump became our heartbeat. It was irregular, sometimes quiet for hours, sometimes a series of frantic knocks. The bunker's temperature, usually a constant 68 degrees, began to swing, down to 64, then up to 72. The climate control was struggling. We pored over the schematics together, heads bent under the work light in the life support room. Cass, with her transit worker's mechanical intuition, was quicker to grasp the plumbing. See this valve here? It's a bypass for the secondary loop. If the primary loop has a bubble or a blockage, we could try to purge it. But the purge valve, I pointed, my finger tracing a line on the diagram. It exits here. The line led to a small label port on the schematic, EXT main access, tunnel wall. The maintenance port was in the subway tunnel, not far from the bunker door, but outside, in Shamblerland. We had to choose. Do nothing and risk a catastrophic failure of the thermal regulator, which would lead to overheating, system shutdown, and eventually, the batteries draining as the climate systems fought a losing battle. Or open the door again. I'll go, Cass said quietly. You got me? I'll fix this. You don't even know if that's the problem. And you don't have the codes or the key. Then we both go. The thump echoed as if in agreement. We planned with a grim focus that finally united us. The external port, according to the schematics, was 20 feet down the tunnel from our door, hidden behind a removable utility panel. We'd have to clear any shamblers, open the panel, open the purge valve, let the system bleed air or debris, then seal it again. A 5-minute job. In hell. We geared up. I had my axe. Cass took a long, heavy wrench from the toolkit as a weapon. We waited for the 0400 lull. Standing in the antechamber again, the dynamic was different. There were two of us. The fear was shared, halved, and also doubled. I met her eyes. She gave a sharp nod. No signs needed. I opened the door. One shambler stood directly outside. Cass didn't flinch. She stepped forward and swung the wrench in a brutal, two-handed arc, caving in the side of its skull. It was efficient, shocking. She'd survived on the platform for a reason. We moved to the utility panel. I pried it open with the axe head. Inside was a confusing nest of pipes and valves, labeled with cryptic codes. Cass shone her light, comparing it to a photograph we'd taken of the schematic. There, the blue-handled valve, quarter-turn counterclockwise. I reached in, turned it. A hiss of pressurized gas and a spurt of rusty water shot out, hitting the tunnel wall. The thump from inside the bunker stuttered, then stopped. A moment of beautiful silence. Then, from down the tunnel, a moan. Then another. The noise had attracted them. Close it. Cass hissed, her light sweeping the darkness. Shapes were emerging from the gloom. I cranked the valve shut. Cass slammed the utility panel back into place. Back! Now! We ran for the bunker door. 3 shamblers were already between us and it, shambling out from behind pillars. We were cut off. Cass didn't hesitate. This way. She grabbed my arm and pulled me in the opposite direction, deeper into the tunnel, away from the bunker. What are you doing? Leading them away. Circle back. We ran, our footsteps echoing. The shamblers pursued, but they were slow. We rounded a bend, then Cass ducked into a narrow service alcove I'd never noticed. We pressed ourselves into the shadows, breathing raggedly. The shamblers blundered past, following the sound of our retreat. After a minute of silence, we crept out. We took a different, longer route through connecting tunnels, Cass navigating with a confidence that stunned me. She knew these tunnels. In 10 minutes, we were approaching the bunker door from the other side. It was clear. We slipped inside, sealed the door, and collapsed against the wall in the antechamber, covered in grime and adrenaline. In the control room, the warning light was off. The thump was gone. The temperature was already stabilizing. We had done it. We had fixed the problem. We had worked as a team. But as I looked at Cass, breathing heavily, a smear of tunnel filth on her cheek, I knew something fundamental had changed. The pressure drop wasn't just in the geothermal unit. It was in the bunker's social atmosphere. The crisis had broken the polite tension. We were no longer 2 survivors sharing a space. We were a crew, flawed, scared, but a crew. And the bunker, for all its perfection, had shown us its fragility. Its survival and ours depended on us venturing out into the falling world. Together, with the pressure stabilized, a new normal settled in. The unspoken tension between Cass and me thawed into a functional, if not quite warm, partnership. We established a joint schedule. She took the night watch, claiming her body clock was permanently set to the perpetual twilight of the maintenance closet. I handled the days. We shared cooking duties, which mostly involved heating MREs, but sometimes experimenting with mixing the components. Beef stew over instant rice became a culinary milestone. Cass's knowledge of the transit system became our most valuable asset. Using the bunker's schematic archives and her own memory, she began drawing a detailed map of the tunnels, service passages, and stations for a mile in every direction. She marked safe routes, choke points, and hives, areas where shamblers congregated, likely where many people had fallen. The map, taped to the control room wall, transformed the unknown labyrinth outside into a navigable, if deadly, terrain. It was her idea to expand our surveillance. The camera on the platform sees nothing. We need eyes in the tunnels. There are security cameras down here, but the feed goes to the MTA's central command, which is probably dark. But the cameras might still have power from local emergency lines. If I can find the junction boxes, I might be able to patch them into your system here. It was a daring plan. It meant more forays outside, but the promise of greater awareness was too tempting. We needed to know if the shamblers were migrating, if other survivors were moving, or if threats like the one that had killed the person on the platform were still active. We embarked on a series of cautious, short expeditions. Our goal wasn't scavenging, we had plenty, but intelligence gathering. Cass led, a ghost in her own domain. We'd move silently, using her routes, to reach main junction boxes. She'd work with a multi-tool and a pocket voltage meter, her hands steady while I stood guard. Axe at the ready. On our third outing, we struck gold. In a junction room near the 23rd Street station, she managed to splice into a fiber optic line. Back in the bunker, after hours of configuring old equipment, we got a feed. Not just one camera. A grid of 12, showing platforms, mezzanines, and key tunnel intersections. The gallery of ghosts, Cass called it. Our world expanded from a single, grainy platform view to a panopticon of the underground dead. We spent hours watching. We saw the shamblers' patterns, their mindless, daily patrols from station to station. We saw a pack of feral dogs tear one apart in a tunnel, a shocking display of a new ecosystem. We saw no other living humans. Then, one night during Cass's watch, she woke me. Lil, you need to see this. On camera 9, showing the northbound tunnel approaching Grand Central, there was a light. Not a flashlight. A fire. A small, contained campfire, burning in the center of the tracks. And around it, for silhouettes, living people. They were cooking something on a skewer. They looked ragged but organized. They had weapons. A rifle, what looked like a spear. Survivors. A group. My heart leaped, then immediately clenched with fear. A group was a community. It was also a potential gang, a tribe that could see our bunker as the ultimate prize. We watched them for an hour. They seemed disciplined. They posted a lookout. They didn't speak loudly. Then, they doused their fire and moved off, northward, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. They're heading uptown, Cass whispered. Maybe they have a base there. Or they're searching for one, I said. Their existence changed everything again. We weren't just two people in a hole. We were two people in a hole near a known transit route used by an armed group. Were they the ones who'd killed a person on our platform? Were they scouts for something larger? A few days later, the gallery of ghosts showed us something else. On camera 4, the platform at 33rd Street, a shambler was acting strangely. It wasn't shambling. It was standing perfectly still, facing a tile wall. Its head was tilted, as if listening. Then it raised an arm and slowly, deliberately, dragged its nails down the wall, creating a faint screeching sound. It did this 3 times, then stopped. Another shambler, 20 feet away, turned and began moving toward the sound. They're communicating, Cass said, her voice hollow with dread. Not much, but that's a signal. A primitive one. It was the final piece of horrible knowledge. The shamblers weren't just ambient hazards. They were a reactive environment. Sound attracted them. Light attracted them. And now we knew they could create sound to attract more of them. They were a network, a hive mind operating on the basis stimuli. This information collided with the discovery of the survivor group to create a perfect storm of anxiety. If that group was noisy, if they fired a gun, they could trigger a cascade, a gathering swarm that could flood the tunnels. A swarm that could, in its mindless movement, stumble upon our hidden door. We had to know more about the group. Were they careful? Were they reckless? Were they a threat? Cass proposed a reconnaissance mission, a long-range one, to follow their probable route, stay hidden and observe. I argued against it. It was too risky. We had everything we needed here. We have a prison, she countered, her eyes on the map. A really nice prison. Those people, they're living out there. They're moving. They have a fire. We need to know if they're the kind of people who will eventually find this door and try to break it down, or the kind we might want to talk to. The word talk hung in the air. Community. The dream of more than two. It was a siren song as dangerous as any shambler. After another week of watching the empty gallery, seeing no sign of the group returning, I reluctantly agreed. We would go north, not to make contact, just to look, to listen. We prepared meticulously, packed for 2 days. Weapons. My axe, her wrench, and the 9mm pistol from the panic room house, which I'd never fired but felt like a talisman of last resort. We studied the map. We had a route and a fallback route. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, listening to Cass's steady breathing below me. We were about to voluntarily leave the greatest sanctuary in the city to spy on strangers and tomb. It was insanity. But as I stared at the schematic of the failing geothermal unit on the wall, I understood her drive. The bunker was a closed system, and all closed systems tend toward entropy. They run down. They fail. The people outside, with their fire and their movement, represented something else, an open system. Adaptation. Life that wasn't just preserving itself, but expanding. We weren't just going to gather intelligence. We were going to see if life was still possible outside the cage. Even if what we found scared us more than the silence, the tunnels north of our territory were a different kind of dead. Less clutter, more vast, empty darkness. The emergency lights were fewer, their batteries long dead. We move in a pool of light from our helmet-mounted LEDs, the beams cutting through a dust so thick it looked like fog. Cass navigated from memory and a handheld compass, her confidence a fragile thread I clung to. We reached the Grand Central Zone by dawn, our internal clock dictated by the bunker's schedule. The scale was staggering. The main concourse, glimpsed through a grate, was a cathedral of shadows, silent but for the distant drip of water. We didn't enter. Cass led us through a maze of maintenance corridors that ran like veins around the great station's bones. We found signs of the group on the second day. In a small employee break room near the 7-line transfer, we found the ashes of a recent fire. Empty cans with labels we didn't recognize, not commercial goods, but homemade with handwritten dates. Peaches, August. They were canning. They had a sustainable food source. This was huge. We also found a hand-drawn map pinned to a wall with a knife. It showed the tunnels from 14th Street to 59th, with notations. Water source filter. Near a pump room. Safe route. Clear monthly along a line. And a symbol that chilled us. A small eye with a line through it near several locations. One of those locations was our sector of the 4/5/6 line. They know this area, Cass whispered, tracing the line. They've scouted it. The eye with a line. A void? Or a blind spot? Or watched? I said, thinking of our camera, had they seen the red power light of a dormant security camera and marked it? We took the map. It was intelligence gold, but taking it was a risk. If they came back, they'd know someone had been here. Pushing further north, following the path marked safe route, we began to hear the echoes, not of shamblers, of life. Distant metallic banging. A voice, too far away to make out words. The sounds were coming from up ahead, near the 59th Street Station complex. We approached with extreme caution, dousing our lights and moving by feel along the wall. The sounds grew clearer. The rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal and a man's voice singing a low, off-key blues tune. We peered around a final corner. The tunnel opened into a wider service area, lit by several battery-powered work lamps. For people were there. 2 were reinforcing a heavy steel gate that sealed off a side passage. One was tending a small pot on a camp stove. The 4th, the singer, was sitting on a crate, whittling a piece of wood. They looked normal, exhausted, thin, but purposeful. They worked together with the easy rhythm of a team. This wasn't a desperate band of scavengers. This was a community doing maintenance. Cass and I exchanged a look. This was the moment. Do we reveal ourselves? Do we watch and leave? The decision was made for us. A 5th person, a woman with a rifle slung over her shoulder, stepped out of the sealed passage. She had an air of authority. She surveyed the work, nodded, then her gaze swept the tunnel. It passed over our hiding spot, paused, and moved on, but then it snapped back. She'd seen something. A glint of my lens, perhaps. She didn't raise an alarm. She simply stared into the darkness where we crouched. "We know you're there," she called out, her voice calm but firm. "You've been following your own echoes for 10 minutes. You can come out. Slowly. Hands where we can see them." We were caught. My hand went to the pistol in my belt. Cass put a firm hand on my wrist and shook her head. No guns. She stood up first, hands raised. I followed, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The work stopped. The 4 people turned, weapons come in hand. A wrench, a pipe, a hatchet. The woman with the rifle didn't raise it, but her finger was near the trigger guard. "We mean no trouble," Cass said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We saw your fire. We're just survivors. From downtown." The woman stepped forward, her lamp illuminating us. She looked us up and down, our cleanish fatigues, our good boots, our well-fed faces, compared to hers. "You're a long way from downtown, and you're awful quiet for scavengers. What's your nest?" "We don't have one," I said, the lie automatic. "Just moving, trying to stay ahead of the hives." She studied me, her eyes sharp. "You're lying. You're not hungry. You're not thirsty. Your gear isn't torn up. You have a base. A good one." She took another step. "My name's Val. This is the Lexington Collective. We're building something here. We don't take kindly to spies." "We're not spies," Cass said. "We're alone. We've been alone for a long time. We just wanted to see if there were others, if it was safe." Val's expression softened a fraction. The word alone seemed to resonate. "It's not safe. Not anywhere. But it's safer together." She lowered her rifle slightly. "You took our map." Cass slowly pulled it from her pocket, held out. "We were curious. We're sorry." One of the men, the singer, chuckled. "Curious gets you dead down here." Val took the map. "You know the tunnels. You found our break room. You found us. That takes skill. Or luck." She made a decision. "You'll come with us. Not as prisoners. As guests. We'll talk. You'll tell us what you know about the southern tunnels. And we'll decide what happens next." It wasn't an offer we could refuse. We were outnumbered and outgunned. They led us through the reinforced gate into their territory. It was a revelation. They'd fortified a series of MTA office suites and maintenance bays near the station. They had running water from a tapped pipe. They had gardens under grow lights, powered by a bank of jerry-rigged car batteries charged by stationary bikes. They had 30 people, maybe more. They had children, silent and wide-eyed, watching us from doorways. It was a functioning, struggling, living society in the gut of the dead city. Val took us to a makeshift council room, an old office with a map-covered table. "Your turn," she said. "Who are you, really? And where's your good base?" Cass and I looked at each other. The secret of the bunker was our greatest asset and our greatest vulnerability. Telling them could mean sanctuary, community, protection. It could also mean invasion, takeover, or exile. We were at a crossroads. We had found the echoes of life. Now we had to decide if we trusted them with our silence. The council of the Lexington Collective listened in skeptical silence as we told a half-truth. We described a reinforced shelter near 14th Street with limited supplies. We said we'd found it sealed, implied it was now our home. We gave them useful intel. The locations of the major shambler hives we'd mapped, the behavior about sound attraction, the feral dog packs. We showed them how to read the old security camera feeds, if they could find power. We traded knowledge for goodwill. Val was no fool. She knew we were holding back. But the intelligence was valuable enough to grant us provisional guest status. For 3 days, we lived with the collective. We saw their strengths, their community, their ingenuity, their shared purpose. We also saw their fragility. Food was a constant worry. Their doctor had died of infection from a minor cut. Their perimeter, while fortified, was vulnerable to a determined swarm. They lived day to day, while we had been living in year-to-year comfort. On the 4th day, Val asked to see me alone. We stood on a catwalk overlooking their main chamber, where people were tending plants and repairing tools. "You have a decision to make, Leo," she said, not looking at me. "You and Cass. You're not drifters. You're custodians. You're protecting something big. I can see it in your eyes, the look of people who aren't starving." She turned to me. "We could use what you have. Not to take it, to share it. Your shelter, if it's as secure as I think, could be a fallback, a hospital, a seed bank for us. In return, you get community, protection, a reason to keep going that isn't just counting down the days on a battery meter." She'd seen right through us. "And if we say no?" I asked. She sighed. "Then you leave, with our thanks for the intel. But you don't come back this way. We can't have a secret, well-fed fortress in our backyard that we don't control. It's a threat. You understand. I did. It was the same calculus that had made me fire a warning shot at the bunker door. Uncertainty is the enemy. I talked to Cass that night, in the tiny storage closet they'd given us. What do you want? I asked her. She was silent for a long time. I want not be afraid all the time, she said finally. But down in the bunker, I was afraid of the silence. Out here, I'm afraid of the noise. Of losing this. She gestured to the thin wall, beyond which we could hear the murmured collective. They have kids, Leo. That was the core of it. The bunker was a past. A desperate, selfish act of preservation. The collective was a future. A broken, struggling, human future. But to give them the bunker was to give up control. To trust. After everything, trust was the hardest currency to spend. The next morning, a sentry's shout echoed through the chambers. Swarm. South Tunnel. Big one. Chaos erupted. The collective snapped into a well-drilled defense. People rushed to barricades. Children were herded into the innermost room. Val grabbed her rifle. What did you do? She snapped at us. Nothing. We came straight here. Something triggered a hive. A big one. We rushed to the southern barricade. The steel gate they'd been reinforcing. Through the gaps, we could see down the tunnel. A wall of shuffling, moaning figures was moving toward us. A river of dead flesh. Dozens. Maybe 100. The sound was a deafening, hungry roar. Something had panicked a massive hive and was flowing toward the only living thing in its path. The collective. They wouldn't hold. The gate was strong, but the pressure would be immense. And if they broke through, I thought of the children. I thought of Cass's face. I thought of my sterile, silent bunker, sitting uselessly while the last flicker of human society was snuffed out. I made the choice. I know a place. I yelled over the moaning. A sealed bunker. 10 minutes south of here if we run. It can hold everyone. It's impenetrable. Val stared at me, seeing the truth finally laid bare. Can you get us in? Yes. But we have to go now. We have to lead the swarm away from here, then circle back to the entrance. It was the only way. Use the bunker as a lure, but for salvation, not destruction. Val didn't hesitate. You heard him. Evacuation Plan Delta. Fall back to the northern route. Leo, Cass, you lead the swarm. We'll get our people out and meet you at your door. You have 20 minutes to open it for us. It was an insane, desperate plan. Cass and I would be the bait. We didn't argue. We grabbed our packs. Val handed us 2 road flares. Make it noisy. We ran out a side passage that looped back to the main tunnel behind the advancing swarm. We popped the flares, their hissing, crimson light filling the passage with hellish glare. We shouted, banged our weapons on the pipes. The front of the swarm hesitated, confused by the new stimulus behind it. Then a large portion broke off and began shambling toward the light and sound. Toward us. Now run. Cass yelled. We ran. We ran like we'd never run before, leading a river of death through the tunnels, back toward our home. We dropped the flares at intersections to keep them following. Our lungs burned. Our legs screamed. We reached the collapse. The shamblers behind us were close, a relentless tide. We scrambled over the rubble, down the other side. The bunker door was ahead. The usual sentries were gone, drawn into the greater swarm. I fumbled with the key, my hands slick with sweat. The dead were pouring over the collapse now, tumbling down in a cascade of rotting limbs. The door opened. We fell inside. I turned to seal it, but Cass stopped me. No, we have to leave it open a crack. A visual for Val. They have to see it. It went against every instinct. We propped it open 2 inches with a chunk of concrete, a sliver of our sanctuary exposed. Then we ran through the antechamber, opened the inner door, and scrambled the control room. On the camera, we watched. The swarm filled the tunnel, pressing against our door, but the narrow crack confused them. They pressed against the solid metal around it. Then, from the other direction, we saw Val and her people, maybe 20 of them, sprinting down the tunnel. They saw the crack of light, The prop door, they saw the swarm. Val didn't stop. She led a charge, not at the swarm, but at its flank, using clubs and axes to carve a narrow, temporary path through the rotting bodies toward the door. It was brutal, efficient chaos. Now! I yelled to Cass. We ran back to the antechamber. Together, we shoved the blocking concrete aside and pulled the door wide open, a beacon in the dark. Here! Now! I screamed. Val and her people surged through the gap. Adults, children, faces etched with terror, poured into the antechamber. I counted them in. Val was last, backing in, firing her rifle once into the pressing crowd of dead before turning and diving inside. Cass and I threw our weight against the door. Hands from inside joined us, dozens of hands. The heavy steel swung shut, crushing the limbs of the lead shamblers, and sealed with that final, definitive clunk. Silence. Then, the sound of ragged breathing, sobbing, the crying of children. We were in. All of us. The silent citadel was silent no more. Val stood amid her stunned, filthy people in the bright, white lighted control room. She looked at the screens, the humming equipment, the sheer impossible scale of the refuge. Then she looked at me and Cass, covered in filth and exhaustion. She didn't say thank you. She just nodded, a leader acknowledging a debt. Then she turned to her people. Okay, everyone sit down. Catch your breath. You're safe. The bunker was breached, not by the dead, but by the living. Its perfect, sterile isolation was gone forever, replaced by the messy, noisy, vital chaos of community. I looked at Cass. She was smiling, a real smile, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. I felt it too. Not fear, not regret, a profound, weary relief. The chain of solitude was broken. The choice had been made. We had traded a fortress for a future. And as the hum of the life support systems mingled with the sound of crying children and whispered reassurances, I knew, for the first time since the world fell, that we hadn't just found a way to survive. We had found a way to live again.